On this podcast, we explore fantastical thinking, moral panics, urban legends, conspiracy theories, hoaxes, and crazes, examine the forces that shape our culture, and tell the stories that create the realities we share, and sometimes the realities we don't. I'm your host, Chelsey Weber-Smith, and this is American Hysteria.
You're a professional writer, aren't you? I said, no, I'm not. I'm a Hillsborough housewife.
Every conceivable segment of society reached this column.
The business of living from one day to the next with just one problem after another.
Some people who write are extremely intelligent, others are fantastically ignorant, but most of them are very serious.
My name is Ned.
Hello, Ned.
It's been 4,000 days since my last drink. It was my first and last blackberry schnapps.
Ned, did you clip Ann Landers today?
Ann Landers is a boring old biddy.
Ned!
I was more animal than man.
Before making this episode, I agreed with the assessment of once drunk Simpsons character Ned Flanders about retro American newspaper advice columnist Ann Landers, and felt the same way about her seemingly stuffy arch-rival Dear Abby, both of whom wrote responses to tens of thousands of questions from their 100 million readers from the 1950s to the early 2000s. But as I began my research in earnest, I quickly found out that these old biddies were many things, but boring was not one of them. Because of my young age and my chosen profession, my original thoughts about Ann Landers and Dear Abby had to do with their peddlings of many classic urban legends. For example, starting as early as the late 1970s, Abby and Ann kept the Halloween sadist tale alive for decades, issuing annual warnings about the dangers of candy received while trick-or-treating. Ann wrote this year after year. Dear readers, in recent years, people with twisted minds have been known to put razor blades and poison in taffy apples and Halloween candy. It is no longer safe to let your child eat treats that come from strangers. In 1960, Dear Abby popularized the urban legend known as the Hook when she printed a warning from a teen named Jeanette, who claimed a couple parked on a lover's lane had almost been killed by an escaped one-handed convict, the lovers finding his hook dangling from the car door handle upon their return home. Then, in 1982, Ann Landers spread another classic, The Killer in the Back Seat, the one where a deranged man was found crouched in the back seat of a woman's car, and she was saved only by the gas station attendant who saw him there and told her there was a problem with her credit card and she better come inside for a moment. Because I had come to know Ann Landers and Dear Abby through these cautionary tales for teens, I assumed that they were just mildly conservative, outdated, and comically careful agony aunts, as advice columnists used to be known. I thought I would mainly be covering their influence over popular urban legends, but I discovered very quickly that I was far more interested in the human side of these housewives-turned-newspaper celebrities, as well as the unparalleled impact these hidden architects of American culture had on public opinion during a half-century of colossal political change. So, I'm going to first tell you the story of the women behind Ask Ann Landers and Dear Abby, their flamboyant lives, their meteoric rise to fame, and their sometimes vicious rivalry. Then I want to share with you the way they handled political and human rights issues in their columns and in their lives as public figures. And I feel confident that the opinions of these allegedly boring old biddies are going to surprise you. Now listen, I can't help but get a little dishy with this episode because of the juicy drama kicked up by these allegedly one-of-a-kind ladies. I say allegedly one-of-a-kind because here's the thing. Ann Landers and Dear Abby were not just professional rivals in the advice industrial complex. Ann Landers and Dear Abby were identical fucking twins.
Dear Abby, my fountain pen leaks. My wife hollers at me and my kids are all freaks. Every side I get up on is the wrong side of bed. If it weren't so expensive, I'd wish I were dead. Signed, unhappy.
As soon as our identical twins, Esther Pauline and Pauline Esther Friedman, learned to talk, they began referring to each other by the Teletubbian nicknames Eppie and Popo, nicknames that would last the rest of their lives. Eppie had won the birth race by 17 minutes, followed by her twin Popo, the future American Queens of Advice, arriving ceremoniously on the 4th of July, 1918. They lived in Sioux Falls, Iowa, with their Russian Jewish immigrant parents, who had, after just 10 years in the country, moved into the upper middle class, their father first running a wagon that sold chicken, then a grocery store, then an artificial ice business, and finally a movie and vaudeville theater mini empire, with stages in 6 surrounding states. From the start, Eppie and Popo were really, really obsessed with each other, totally inseparable in that twin-based secret world that the rest of us will never understand. They wore the same clothes, hung out with all the same friends, and yes, slept in the same bed with their arms wrapped around one another from the day they left their cribs until the day they were married. When the girls entered junior high, one teacher sought to separate them into different classes, and the principal was met by twin sobbings as they told him, in no uncertain terms, that they would rather die. As you might imagine, their upbringing was colored by their father's vaudeville business, a bawdy world of brash comedians, showgirls, and sexual innuendo. They got a taste for the limelight young by performing on their father's stages, singing twin duets or playing twin duets on their twin violins. Everyone knew the flamboyant Friedman twins when they were growing up, and that's how they wanted it. In fact, they arrived for their first day of freshman year at Morningside College in matching skunk skin coats. Their first foray into published work came as they teamed up on a school newspaper column known as Campus Rats, performing the role of the student body gossip girl with the clever moniker Peep for Pauline Esther and Esther Pauline. They happily snooped around and printed adorably snarky little articles about who was seen canoodling with whom among the library stacks. Though they both focused their college studies in journalism and psychology, Eppie and Popo commented on several occasions that they actually majored in boys. In fact, they would never earn their degrees, dropping out to focus fully on the boys, or rather, the men. Popo met her future husband, Morton Phillips, known as Mort, at a frat party the sisters attended at the University of Minnesota. Mort's vibe was moderate to the core, in politics, in social issues, in school, and in stature. But there was nothing moderate about the wealth of the Phillips family. In fact, his was one of the richest in the whole Midwest, making their millions from a liquor empire and then from a major appliance company. Eppie became engaged around the same time to a law student from a relatively well-off family, and the two began to plan their double wedding and to shop for their matching wedding dresses. But as they were perusing a department store to find their matching veils, a salesman approached Eppie and flashed her a smile that would transform her entire future in a moment. She fell in love at first sight with Jules Lederer, a high school dropout who chain-smoked cigarettes and didn't have a steady job, but his charm and sense of humor beat out her boring law student. In order to keep their original wedding date, Eppie and Jules cut their engagement short, and the couples were married side by side in 1939 on their 21st birthday. They had planned, of course, a double honeymoon through Canada, but in one of the first ruptures of their identical lives, Eppie and Jules could not afford the trip and had to part ways with Popo and Mort in Chicago. After Mort took a cushy job at his father's appliance company, National Presto Industries, Popo found herself living in a luxurious house in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, filling her days as a housewife turned socialite. But in various cities across the country, Popo's beloved sister Eppie and her husband Jules were living a very different kind of life, forced to move 11 times in just 8 years, as Jules took whatever job he could find, from Sioux Falls to Los Angeles to New Orleans. Popo's husband Mort eventually offered Jules a sales job with Presto, and the sisters were reunited in Eau Claire. But there were class issues right away. Popo and Mort were Wisconsin royalty in their mansion with their live-in cooks and maids, while Eppie and Jules lived in a rented compact house that Eppie called, pejoratively, the Peanut Palace. As the financial situation of Eppie and Jules began to slowly change, both twins started exuding an air of success, beauty, and confidence, both going for the same trademark bouffant hairstyle that was almost cartoonish in its shape, size, and perfection, both opting for opulent clothing, jewelry, and makeup, never appearing publicly unless they looked absolutely flawless, which they always did. Nonetheless, whispers around town rumored that Eppie was envious of Popo's status, but those whispers were allegedly started by Popo herself. Eppie decided to volunteer for the Wisconsin Democrats solely because she absolutely hated Wisconsin Senator turned Red Scarer Joseph McCarthy. She took her rage a step further when she ran for the Eau Claire Democratic County Chair. The election was held on January 19, 1954, and she lost by a decent margin, but immediately and boisterously challenged the results, saying in the unique accent and tone of voice she shared with her sister, quote, "This was a rigged, stacked, and packed meeting, a phony." Yes, I will be doing my best to perform the parts of both Eppie and Popo during the times they are speaking outside of writing their columns. Anyway, the reason she was pushing back on the election results was that committee members had been allowed to cast their votes who lived outside of the county. Her accusations led to a mini political firestorm, and a new election was indeed held after the original was deemed to have been improperly conducted. In a major upset, Eppie somehow came out victorious, with the Democrat who presided over the whole affair calling it, quote, "the biggest, longest, and most heated meeting the Democrats ever had in this county." It was a glorious win, but after just 3 months of officially holding the position, Eppie announced that she, her husband, and her sister were going on a 2.5-month European vacation until September 1st. As soon as they arrived home, she promptly resigned her position, citing her husband's new job in Chicago and her need to move with him, which is just true diva behavior. Jewel's new position as the president of a ballpoint pen manufacturer paid a lot more money than Presto Industries. The couple, with their teenage daughter Margot now headed to private school, packed up and drove 4.5 hours away to Chicago, becoming the owners of a newer, fancier condo overlooking Lake Michigan. But with her daughter gone all day and out with friends in the evening, and her husband staying at the office late or traveling for work, the 37-year-old Eppie found herself terrifically bored. Hoping to continue her Democratic work in Chicago, Eppie quickly discovered that she was not cut out for big city politics, and instead volunteered with different charitable organizations. But still, she needed something more. Remembering her time as a journalism student and gossip columnist back at college, Eppie called up a friend of hers who worked at the Chicago Sun-Times and asked if their advice columnist might need an assistant. By total coincidence, Ruth Crowley, who had carried the moniker Ann Landers since 1943, had just passed away unexpectedly at the age of 48. After her death, the Chicago Sun-Times started taking applications for the next Ann Landers, and Eppie was invited to give it her best shot. She was required to answer 3 different questions, one about relationships between people of different religions, one about psychosomatic hives, and one about a walnut tree-related feud between neighbors. After receiving the answers of all the applicants, a psychological profiler was brought in by the newspaper to give his opinions on each of them, and he said that Eppie scored the highest mark of aggressiveness that he had ever seen. That was, apparently, all the Chicago Sun-Times needed to know, so Eppie Lederer became Ann Landers. And of course, the first thing she did was paint her new office a bright bubblegum pink. Shortly after, the new iteration of the Ann Landers column was promoted in the newspaper this way.
From simple pathos to real tragedy, all the frailties of human nature pass in review through Your Problems by Ann Landers, a warmly human column that is for many the only refuge from frantic worry. Starting today on page 6.
More after this. And now, back to the show. Though exciting, Eppie's new working girl reality was also overwhelming, which became especially obvious on her first day in her new office when she saw the massive stack of that week's 5,000 letters. Perhaps recalling the comfort once provided by the slumbering, loving arms of her twin sister, she called up Popo and begged for her help. Well, that was Popo's version of events. Eppie claimed that it was actually Popo who begged her to be a part of the Ann Landers column. One of the first letters the twins answered together was from a woman who couldn't stop thinking about her first love from high school, a man who had long been married with children. The twins, as Ann Landers, responded, "Wake up, Sleeping Beauty. After all, this romance must have started some 20 years or so ago. What's your ex-true love going to do about his wife and children? Stop reading love fiction and get out and find yourself a real live man. P.S. Almost everyone dreams of their first love occasionally, but most of us do grow up eventually." Though happy with their answers, when Eppie's boss found out that they were working together, he forbade it, claiming that those writing in were doing so under the assumption of privacy. So the bummed out Popo returned to her new home in the suburbs of San Francisco, where Mort was opening a new branch of Presto Industries. But she was not ready to give up the ecstatic high she got from being half of the housewife oracle, Ann Landers. Less than 3 months after her sister made her advice column premiere, Popo approached the San Francisco Chronicle and asked to create her own advice column, apparently with the same aggressiveness as her twin, while wearing a little black Dior dress, black pumps, and a leopard skin coat.
So he said, well, what do you do? I said, I'm a Hillsborough housewife. I didn't have a Social Security number. I'd never worked a day of my life. I did volunteer work. I was a gray lady in hospitals, and I worked for the UJA and the United Crusade.
So what did he have you do, answer letters?
He said, yes. He brought the letters back, and he said, now you use the letters put to her, strike out the answers, and write in your own and bring them back in about a week. Went to my husband's office, about 3 blocks from the Chronicle, got behind a typewriter, and I went to work. Duck soup, easy, one-liners. An hour and a half, I was back at the Chronicle. And he said, oops, so soon? I said, yeah. And he said, okay, you're a professional writer, aren't you? I said, no, I'm not. He said, this is fabulous. When can we see you? I said, is tomorrow too soon? Went back the next day, and he said, this is exactly what we want.
Like all the advice columnists who had come before, she chose a pen name for her columns, Abigail Van Buren, and chose to write under the column title, Dear Abby. So now that we've entered into the era in which the twins took on new personas, I've decided to help keep these identities straight by referring to Eppie/Ann Landers as Eppie Ann and Popo/Dear Abby as Popo Abby. You're welcome. As you might imagine, the columns that Eppie Ann and Popo Abby produced were quite similar in tone, though it's been said that Dear Abby's responses were just a little bit brasher, quippier, and less thoughtful than her sister's. The first ever letter printed in her column was sent in by a secretary who asked desperately for her advice because she'd fallen in love with her married boss, a man who apparently wanted to leave his wife for her but said it would ruin him socially and financially. Saying she believed he would one day make her his wife, Dear Abby responded to the letter signed Confident this way. Dear Confident, I think your boss is a super salesman. He certainly did a terrific job when he convinced an intelligent girl like you to give up a decent, respectable life of her own to be available when he whistles. Of course he won't marry you. Why should he? He is getting the whole show for the price of the amusement tax. Dear Abby carried on this kind of style for the rest of her career. Here she is 2 decades later, reading a letter too risque to print on the Joan Rivers Show.
Dear Abby, we work in a large office. Our office manager, I'll call him Marvin, is a middle-aged family man. The boss's secretary, I'll call her Sissy, is a shapely young divorcee. Since Sissy came to work here, she and Marvin have been spending a lot of time together in the file room with a door lock. Of course, what they do in there is their business, but we're tired of covering up for them when the boss comes looking for Sissy. What do you suggest? And it's signed the office gang. Dear gang, the next time the boss comes looking for Sissy, tell him to look in the file room under Marvin.
The twin advice columnists, the 2 square Jewish housewives, as Anne once referred to herself, responded to letters from all kinds of people.
School teachers, bricklayers, ditch diggers, construction workers, college professors, bank presidents, nurses, doctors, clergymen. Every conceivable segment of society reached this column. Some of the letters are screamingly funny, others are tragic. Some people who write are extremely intelligent, others are fantastically ignorant. Some are psychotic, some are putting me on, but most of them are very serious.
They printed stories about cheating husbands, frigid wives, neighbor disputes, and other moral quandaries, everything from the frivolous to the tremendously significant. At first, both women were responding largely to teenage letters about silly family fights, friendship problems, and 50s dating dilemmas that definitely included sex. Eppie would later say in an interview that instead of properly learning about sex at her high school, they learned about it on the vaudeville stage. Quote, "We got our sex education talking to the chorus girls. They were a pretty fast crowd." Their uncommon Cold War-era upfrontness about sexuality did lead to threats from advertisers to stop the smut or else lose their ads, despite the fact that both columns were definitely slut-shamey and strongly encouraging young readers to wait until marriage. Just the fact that they were talking about it at all was seen as offensive. In the first couple decades of their columns, Eppie and Popo Abby were somewhat conservative in their opinions about dating and about the family unit. According to Life magazine,
"The two women are the embodiment of female orthodoxy. They believe in their bones that marriage must be permanent, even when disturbed by masculine lunacy. And they occasionally suggest, more by their tone than by their words, that they find women who cannot make it work faintly ridiculous."
In the vein of our modern wife guys, both of these women became true husband gals, believing that the men in the relationship were the ultimate authority, saying so in their letters and living so in their home lives. Eppie even sewed the words Jewel's wife into the hems of all her clothing. Though the twins enjoyed the status that their columns provided, it was clear that they cared deeply about their readers and took their responsibility very seriously. With help from their staff, both women responded to every letter that was sent in, sometimes thousands a week, especially those that expressed emotional and mental problems. Both consulted a long list of experts and referred readers to psychologists, religious leaders, doctors, and other kinds of specialists. Here's Anne giving one of her many public speeches.
I really don't write to be funny. Every answer I give, I hope, will help the person with the problem. And if it amuses as well, I say all the better. And I think the most important thing that I do is something that many of you don't even know about. And that is sending people to the service agencies so they can get the kind of continuing help that they need.
Though both were experiencing similar levels of success, the fact that her sister had swooped in to copy her new advice columnist identity wasn't sitting well with Eppie Ann. Popo Abby defended her choice by claiming that she never actually thought her column would appear in syndication, that she would remain San Francisco's official agony aunt, and that would be the extent of her reach. But after only a few weeks as Abigail Van Buren, she was getting offers from newspapers across the country that wanted to host Dear Abby. At first, the twins divvied up cities in order to try to avoid competition. But for whatever reason, Popo Abby went back to their hometown paper, the Sioux City Journal, and offered Dear Abby at a reduced rate, so long as they stopped running Ask Ann Landers. It worked, and Eppie Ann was ousted, embarrassed and angry that the people she grew up with would notice her sister's successful usurping. After this, Eppie refused to answer Popo's calls and letters, beginning the first period of tense silence between the once inseparable twins, and beginning an ever-spicy competition to the top of the advice column industry. Though they were pretty neck and neck in syndication and readership numbers, after the first year, Time magazine would call Popo Abbie the fastest rising lonely heart columnist in the United States, which I imagine did not go over well with her sister. Eppie Ann's husband Jules said of their roiling rift,
"Blood is thicker than water, and it boils quicker."
After 2 years, word had gotten around about their feud, and it delighted newspaper editors who believed that this dishy bad blood between successful, eccentric, identical twins was a veritable gold mine. The refrain became, if these twins couldn't get along with one another, how could they advise the masses on relationship issues? A gossipy 1958 feature printed in Life magazine titled,
"Twin lovelorn advisors torn asunder by success,"
brought the feud into the public eye. Popo Abbie and Eppie Ann held no punches in the interview. After speaking about how hard she had worked to get her twin to start talking to her again, Popo Abbie got a little underhanded. Quote, "I understand why she's disturbed. She wanted to be the first violin in the school orchestra, but I was. She swore she'd marry a millionaire, but I did. I'm not trying to be the champion. It's just like playing poker. If you don't have to win, you get the cards, and she's always just had to win. But I love her." In one more low blow, Popo Abbie brought up her sister's nose job from more than a decade before, saying that it revealed her sister's Freudian flaws of character, conveniently leaving out the part where she had planned on getting a nose job too, until her husband told her not to. As they always did with such exposés, Eppie Ann and Popo Abbie would claim that the Life feature was full of misquotes and quotes taken out of context, but the juicy article boosted their popularity enormously, leading to dozens of new syndications and a new focus on the twin personas behind the advice columns. As their relationship continued in silence, their wealth and fame grew, and it really started to show. Obviously, the twins had always had strong tastes and extravagant aesthetics, but after their columns took off, they got real weird with it. Among her classier decor, Popo Abbie had a robust collection of monkey-related memorabilia, and as stated in a response to a girl's letter complaining that her father would not allow her to buy a pet monkey, she responded that she herself once had 2 monkeys, named David and Bathsheba, and she wouldn't recommend it. In a profile of Ann Landers, who boasted no such simian sensibility, the journalist described a typical evening in her bathtub.
"Later she'll recline in perfumed bubbles, a buxom Venus in reading glasses, in the kind of mirrored, marbled bathroom they use to pose Miss Februaries for Playboy. Not to be confused with her bathroom that has the seashell-shaped toilet and sink, or the other one with the hand-laid mosaics featuring water nymphs, fish, vines, and Neptune."
In 1964, after 6 years of not speaking, Eppie Ann called Popo Abbie out of the blue and asked what she and Mort were doing for their 25th wedding anniversary, which, remember, was also Eppie's 25th wedding anniversary to Jules. When Popo told her that they were going on vacation to Bermuda, Eppie asked if she and her husband could come along. Popo was elated. Of course, they were very welcome. The feud had been a great bit of promo, but all who knew them were relieved when they could finally come home to each other and again share a bed, something that they still did every night they got to spend together, often chatting away until dawn. But But the feud was not yet completely dead and buried. After the first decade, Popo Abbey was winning the syndication war with 700 newspapers running her column compared to Eppie's 638, though Eppie's actual readership numbers were slightly larger. Still, they were holding their relationship together the best they could, but apparently they couldn't help sending out public shade for long. At the beginning of her career, Popo was able to get the trademark for Abigail Van Buren, but Eppie was not able to do the same with Ann Landers, since the column had already existed before she took over. This meant that Popo Abbey was able to profit off the column to a far greater degree than her sister, which led to even more tension between the two. These hard feelings escalated in 1972 when Popo Abbey would strike her first commercial deal with Checkerboard Foods for their new Easy Bake English muffins.
I'm Dear Abby, and one of the toughest questions I've been asked used to come from my own husband and teenage son. What's new for snacks or lunch? Here's the answer. New frozen Piccadilly circles in your choice of 5 delicious toppings. Pop them into your oven, and just 8 minutes later, you have a hot, hearty meal and an English muffin. Piccadilly circles, you're solving a lot of problems for Dear Abby.
Piccadilly circles, an idea we just cooked up at Checkerboard Foods.
She then took another gig as a spokesperson for the California Milk Producers Advisory Board, the original Got Milk Girlie. In the ad, which is probably now lost forever, she says, quote, "I very seldom have a cold, and I think I can probably attribute that to the fact that I've been a milk drinker all my days." This little line caused the Federal Trade Commission to chastise her after they received complaints about her misleading health information. Popo Abbey said she had no issue doing commercials, publicly stating that all the proceeds were going to go to the Franz Alexander Chair of Psychiatry at USC, but Eppie Ann was disgusted, or at least she feigned disgust. She was furious because she thought people might mistake Ann Landers for Abigail Van Buren, and she was right. A mixed-up reader wrote into Ann asking why she was now doing commercials. She printed her reply, quote, "I have never endorsed a product in my life and never will. Ann Landers is not for sale." But in reality, Eppie's Ann Landers contract forbade her from doing commercials. So whether this was a true moral stance or an easy way to get a jab in at her sister, we may never know. She continued harping on the difference between her and her sell-out sister, the one who sunk to the sick level of doing advertisements. I mean, who does something so gauche? More after this. And now, back to the show.
But I have changed my views, particularly in the area of divorce. You know,
you didn't believe that divorce would be good under any circumstance.
No, you are right.
Mm-hmm.
When I first started to write the column in 1955, I was firmly convinced that marriage was forever. No matter how rotten it was, you stayed with the guy and you gutsed it out because you had made a commitment. But I've changed my mind. I always felt that, you know, that divorce was very bad for the children and that the anxieties and the separation. But I have really changed my mind about this.
What changed your mind?
Well, I began to see too many situations where people were miserable together, and their children reflected their hostility and their anger, and that such a marriage was not good for either man or wife or the children. And then I began to see some very good second marriages. I began to see people who were very happy in a second marriage, and their whole lives had changed, and their children seemed to be a great deal more content and less nervous. So I got to think.
Well, the children's attitude must change as well. That is, the younger generation probably feels somewhat differently about the individual happiness of their parents than our generation, if you don't mind my saying our generation.
Yes, yeah, we're in the same generation.
But
Don't be shy.
But there was a time, I think, when there was a rigidity about our own view of that. That is that our parents must stay together.
Oh, now in my grandmother's day, I mean, no matter what happened, you just put up with it. And this is the way it was. But I think, too, the fact that women have become more independent economically has enabled them to get out of a bad marriage in a way that there was no way out, say, 35 years ago.
By the mid-1970s, after 20 years of Ask Ann Landers strongly advocating against divorce in her columns, her readers' experiences, as well as her own daughter's divorce and remarriage, started to soften her views. But soon, advice queen Ann Landers would be the one who needed answers. In a shocking 1975 column, Eppie Ann got personal in a way she never had before. Here is the abridged version titled, "The Lady with All the Answers Doesn't Have an Answer to This One." It read, "Dear readers, the sad, incredible fact is that after 36 years of marriage, Jules and I are being divorced. Jules is an extraordinary man. He was loving, supportive, and generous. He is still all those things, and I will always cherish our wonderful years together. That we are going our separate ways is one of life's strongest ironies. How did it happen that something so good for so long didn't last forever? The lady with all the answers does not know the answer to this one. I apologize to my editors for not giving you your money's worth today. I ask that you not fill this space with other letters. Please leave it blank as a memorial to one of the world's best marriages that didn't make it to the finish line. Ann Landers." This was an extremely generous way to write about what had just happened to her. The nearly 60-year-old Jules had told her at dinner one evening that he had been having an affair for several years, and the woman in question was 25, 6 years younger than their daughter, and he had already begun moving her into their shared townhouse in London. Eppie Ann didn't hesitate. She told him, "The marriage is over," said she was going on a vacation to Greece, and that it would be best if he were gone when she returned. In the most housewifeian move I've ever heard of, she still went out and bought him 24 pairs of brown socks, 24 handkerchiefs, 12 shirts, and 12 pairs of shorts, and wrote down the numbers of his doctor, the pharmacy, and the dry cleaners before she said goodbye. Jules would marry his new girlfriend just 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. But luckily, Eppie Ann had her dear readers who sent 30,000 supportive letters in response to her divorce announcement. She later told journalists that she kept them in shoeboxes in her closet for the rest of her life. It's true that Popo had been there to help her sister through this horrible time, but the loving pause on their feud didn't last too long. 6 years after Eppie's divorce in 1981, Popo appeared on The Charlie Rose Show to promote a new book called The Best of Dear Abby. At one point during the conversation, and believe me, I really tried to find this clip online but couldn't, Charlie Rose brought up the infamous feud between Dear Abby and Ann Landers. He asked Popo Abby if she read the Ann Landers column, and she responded, clearly a little miffed that the feud was being brought up yet again, "Of course." Then he asked, while leaning forward with a smirk,
"And does Ann Landers read Dear Abby?"
Popo only nodded, squeezing a lace handkerchief in her hands. Charlie Rose, in a true trash talk show moment, said,
"Well, let's see what Ann has to say."
And then, in the bottom right-hand corner of the TV screen appeared a small square with Eppie's face inside, playing a video from an earlier interview Charlie Rose had done with Ann Landers. In the replay, he's then seen asking Eppie,
"Anne, do you read Dear Abby's column?"
She responded stiffly through clenched teeth, "No, it runs in a Chicago paper, which I do not read." Of course, Popo Abby's reaction to the clip was caught live, her mouth falling open ever so slightly, a distraught look flashing across her perfectly make-upped face for only a moment before she recomposed herself. Taking the high road, at least at first, she responded, "I read her column every day. I don't care what paper it's in. I wouldn't miss it for the world." But soon, Popo Abby careened off the high road and crashed back onto the low-ass road, agreeing to a print interview with Ladies' Home Journal. Commenting on Eppie Ann's plastic surgery as well as her divorce, she said, quote, "If she looked old, if she needed a facelift, believe me, it's because she needed it. I'm quite opposed to chopping myself up, but it was her right. Why not? When you cry a lot, it's got to show." Fucking brutal. She went on to say that Eppie Ann had essentially caused her husband Jules to have an affair. Quote, "He got tired of being Mr. Landers." Papers all over the country were wired a story about the piece, so it's likely that millions more heard the highlights, or perhaps the lowlights. Though somehow this didn't cause another years-long period of silence, their relationship continued to be fraught with competition. Starting in 1987, Popo began writing the Dear Abby column with her daughter Jean, starting a slow 13-year-long torch passing. It wasn't until the year 2000 that Popo Abby announced that her daughter was her co-writer, and it wasn't until 2002 that she would finally step away from the column altogether because of her progressing Alzheimer's disease. Eppie continued Ask Ann Landers until she passed away in 2002 when she was 83 years old, her multiple myeloma taking her life the very same year that her sister's Alzheimer's took her mind away. I wish I could say that their feud had a clear and happy resolution, that the twins returned to their bed and the arms of the other for their final days as Eppie and Popo. But the only indication we have of what their relationship was actually like at the end came from Popo's daughter, who claimed it was warm, and said that when Popo heard the news of her identical twin's death, quote, "She went to bed. She did not take it well. I do wish that one more time she would have found her sister there."
I must tell you, though, something I think is very amusing. My twin and I always sleep together, as we did every day of our lives until we were married. And we still sleep together when she visits me in Beverly Hills, or I visit her in Chicago. And on one of these occasions, we were sleeping together, talking our heads off until dawn, as we always did. And I confided that I had finally gotten around to going to see one of those X-rated movies I'd heard so much about. And she said, "Do you mean to tell me that you actually bought a ticket at the box office and went in to see it?" I said, "Sure, I was curious. I'd heard so much about it, I just had to see it." And she said, "Well, I'm curious too. But I haven't got the nerve, and I'm afraid somebody will recognize me. I mean, how'd you get away with it?" I said, "It was easy. I put on my dark glasses and my Ann Landers wig, and I went."
More with Dear Abby right after this. Be right back for this.
Eppie Ann would say during a speech that a column she put out in 1977 was the most responded to of all time, eliciting 15,000 responses out the gate and thousands more as the topic was revived over the years. In fact, I would be surprised if you, dear reader, don't have a strong opinion on this vital issue yourself. It started when a reader named Paper Crazy wrote about a disagreement they had had with extended family members, sparked by the writer's assertion that the paper from the toilet paper roll, quote, should be coming from the wall up toward the top, over and out. An opinion that started a heated family debate when they demanded that it was just the opposite. In Anne's answer, she took a diplomatic approach, responding, "Dear PC, there is no right or wrong way to dispense paper towels or toilet tissue. It's strictly a matter of personal preference. My preference happens to be the same as your cousin's. Maybe it's because I'm from Iowa too, and that's the way my mother used to do." Now, despite the frivolity that often marked both Ask Ann Landers and Dear Abby, there are many, many examples of the twins taking on hot-button political issues with far more liberal opinions than most people ever expected. In 1961, a man calling himself Detroiter wrote to Ann Landers for advice about how to treat a visibly gay childhood friend who had just moved to his town, a man he still cared a great deal about. His wife had forbidden him from inviting the friend over to their house, claiming it would ruin them socially. Ann's response went like this. "Dear Detroiter, you wouldn't snub a friend because he was crippled by polio, would you? Well, your boyhood friend is an emotional cripple. Many homosexuals lead useful lives and enrich society through their creative efforts. Homosexuals of past decades have contributed handsomely to the arts and sciences. A person so afflicted, if he behaves in a socially acceptable manner, should not be insulted or snubbed." Not the most generous response if taken in the context of today's society, but it was certainly far ahead of its time in 1961, made clear by the hate-filled letters she received soon after and later printed in the town hall version of her column. A reader from Cleveland wrote,
"The idea of a woman in your position standing up for queers."
But she included the other side as well. An LA reader wrote in,
"Your column about homosexuals was like a beacon of light in a dark world."
Whereas Ann Landers often pointed to the then current clinical definition of homosexuality as mental disorder, Dear Abby refused to accept that premise from the start. In 1971, she wrote, "The most burdensome problem the homosexual must bear is the stigma placed upon him by an unenlightened and intolerant society. They are neither sick nor degenerate. They are simply different. Mine is a plea for compassion and understanding for these misunderstood and mistreated souls. They too are God's children." She wrote on the topic again in 1973, quote, "Homosexuality is a problem because an unenlightened society has made it a problem. All they ask is to be allowed to love in their own way without facing the charge that they are sick and twisted. I say, love and let love." Despite Eppie Ann's unfortunate hang-up with the mental illness angle, she still advocated for the gay rights movement as the rising and vocal opposition was turning homosexuals into the newest folk devils. In Us magazine, Eppie Ann referred to the most famous anti-gay crusader of the time as that Anita Bryant dame, and was quoted as saying, "Why, I would sooner leave my grandchildren with a homosexual than I would with her. Where does she get off saying homosexuals recruit from our young when any psychiatrist would tell you that that's not their bag? Boy, if there's one thing I distrust, it's a person who thinks God talks directly to her." She followed that up a few years later by printing what was essentially a response to Anita Bryant's anti-gay Save the Children campaign and her familiar refrain about the dangers that queer people posed to the youth. The question referred to the fear of leaving a 5-year-old boy with a gay family member named Greg, who was otherwise considered to be an upstanding man. She responded, quote, "If it's child molesting you are concerned about, may I disabuse you of a common myth? The vast majority of males who go in for this sort of thing are heterosexuals. Some gays have been known to bother little boys, but this is not their usual pattern. If it were my son, I would have no hesitation whatever about allowing Greg to be alone with the youngster." In 1976, let me repeat that, 1976, Dear Abby responded to a mother whose son was dating a transsexual woman named Agnes, who she was very fond of and who made her son very happy. But she felt that the relationship would bring shame upon her family if anyone found out the truth. Abby responded, quote, "Ask Agnes to tell you more about the transsexual phenomenon. Nature sometimes makes mistakes, but God has divinely inspired men with the medical and scientific knowledge plus the surgical skill to correct them. Hold up your head. You have nothing to be ashamed of." I'd like to point out that both the writer and Abby used the correct pronouns for Agnes with what seems now like incredible ease. And then in the early 80s, 2 years before President Ronald Reagan said the word AIDS publicly, the twins were educating their readers about how HIV actually spread and were strongly warning against the fear-based hysteria that was being expressed by the American public. Both condemned the idea that AIDS was a gay disease, and they were angry that people were pushing conspiracy theories that the gay community was spreading it intentionally. They tried to debunk rumors through giving straightforward information on transmission, symptoms, and prevention, and implored their readers not to ostracize people with AIDS, to not make it a moral issue, and instead a health issue. They were ahead of their time on many other topics as well. In 1970, 3 years before Roe v. Wade was voted on in the Supreme Court, Dear Abby printed the opinion that, quote, "No woman should be forced by law to have a child she does not want." Ann Landers responded to a 1981 letter regarding abortion, saying, in part, quote, "The same people who want to save those babies are unwilling to give them food stamps. They don't care if the babies live in roach-infested houses. They don't care if they get adequate schooling. It's a strange contradiction that the people who say they want to save lives have so little compassion for people after they are born." In response to this column, the Pro-Life Action League launched a campaign called Dump Ann Landers, or Can Ann, and were soon joined in their fight by the American Life Lobby, both of which urged readers to write to their papers and boycott those that continued to carry her column. But when newspapers took polls to decide what to do, they found that readers wanted her to stay at a ratio of at least 10-1. Anne doubled down on the controversy, agreeing to appear in full-page ads for the National Abortion Rights Action League in the weeks leading up to the U.S. Senate vote on the Human Life Amendment, with the heading, "Ann Landers on Abortion." The ad encouraged readers to cut out a pre-made coupon to send to their senators to sway their vote. This, of course, caused a temporary spike in the Can Ann movement, though ultimately it made little, if any, difference in terms of her readership. Eventually, Eppie Ann would comment in an interview, quote, "If I get one more copy of the Diary of an Unborn Child, I'll kill myself." Eppie Ann once publicly visited a colony of people with Hansen's disease, known as leprosy, and spent time with each patient, armed with the knowledge that the panic around the disease was totally false. She stood up for sex workers and advocated for their profession to be made legal. She was vocal about her opinion that America needed far stricter gun control laws, leading to a nasty relationship with the NRA. Both women discussed the issue of racism, imperfectly, of course, but they still forced readers to question the stereotypes and prejudices of American culture. Popo Abbey fought against the Reagan administration during and after his election in 1980, telling her readers, quote, "What's the poor person to do? Lord knows we need mental health clinics, education, medicine, programs for the elderly, the poor. I'd say vote in an administration that will be more caring, that will take care of its people."
The business of living from one day to the next is just one problem after another. Most people just want someone to listen to them.
What do you consider a good formula for life?
Giving, I think, is the key word to real happiness. Because, Ed, if you aren't giving, you aren't living.
From the very beginning of their careers, both columnists respected the young people of America, never talking down to them or coddling them, and delivering information on sexual health and drug use that they would be unable to find anywhere else, even following their lead when it came to the political issues of the day. Here's Eppie Ann in the 1970s.
I have great faith in the younger generation. I think the kids are good. Don't forget the kids were the first ones to raise their voices against the Vietnam War. We've never in our history had anything like that. The kids were the first to talk about environment, about ecology. This was the kids. I have great faith in the kids.
Even with their changing values.
Yes, because I think many of their values are changing for the better.
Oftentimes, Ann Landers and Dear Abby stepped back and let their readers argue amongst themselves, printing letters that both agreed and disagreed with whatever stance they had taken on a question, leading to the column becoming a kind of printed town hall, a town hall that was often spitting mad at their more liberal opinions. Anne was especially good at responding to criticism, and had no problem doing so in her column. She had a goofy way of essentially doing penance for her advice sins with a tongue-in-cheek cat of nine tails. Let's look at this query from 1956.
Dear Ann Landers, the gang down here at the plant wants to know how you feel about dames who wear ankle bracelets. I'm making book on your answer. Annie, I hope you don't let me down. Bonnie.
Anne's response? Ankle bracelets are okay, Barney, for newborn babies in a hospital nursery. When I see them on the street, it always reminds me of a monkey who bit her chain and got away from her owner. After receiving and then printing a letter from a woman upset about her offensive comments against the ankle bracelet community, Anne responded, quote, "You are correct. I was asked for my opinion of ankle bracelets and I gave it. However, since this is purely a matter of personal taste and I have long heralded the right of the individual, I agree. You have a point." In what would become her most famous Ann Landerism, she ended with 20 lashes with a wet noodle for Landers. The wet noodle came out often, and sometimes it was for more serious transgressions. She gave herself 40 licks in 1995 when she apologized for using that slur for a Polish person to refer to the Pope. In December of 2000, she was, quote, royally clobbered for her advice to the parents of a gay man who had not come out to them yet and who wanted to let him know that they loved and supported him. Anne told them that, quote, if there was ever a time to adhere to the old Ann Landers caveat, MYOB, mind your own business, this is it. After the inevitable backlash, she printed a series of dissenting opinions and apologized, and then, as she said, brought the wet noodle out of retirement. At the end of that column, she addressed her audience directly, and it was clear that her views had been evolving. Quote, "Dear readers, same-sex relationships are not a lifestyle. It's the way some people are born. Such individuals should not need to hide. They should be accepted as they are with no apologies." One could say that the wet noodle made light of Anne's more serious mistakes, but at the same time, it was a way of owning up to her errors that allowed others the permission to do so with their own, without that dire feeling of shame and humiliation that sometimes accompanies being wrong, that sometimes makes people dig in and double down. Popo Abbey once said, quote, "I've gone through a gradual process of loosening my views as my children became adults, and they and their friends taught me that maybe I was a little out of step." Ann Landers and Dear Abby have been referred to as the mothers of America, but that does not feel right to me. They were more like the therapists of America, someone you could ask difficult questions to, share difficult opinions with, challenge and be challenged by, without the same stakes of speaking to someone in your own personal life that might judge you too harshly.
You said something at a press conference earlier today that was interesting. You say you don't offer solutions to problems. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yes. I don't believe that anyone can solve anyone else's problem. All I can do is turn on a light, help them see the problem, talk about it. And often in that very process, the person will lead himself to his solution. Because I am not a problem solver. In the final analysis, each person has to solve his own problem. But I can help him see aspects of the problem that perhaps he hasn't seen, or put it in proper perspective for him. Every time I make a speaking tour, there's somebody there, 1, 2, 3, 5 people will come up to me and they'll put my hand in theirs and they'll say, "You know, I wrote to you 4 years ago and boy, you saved my life."
Their columns were so many things: a confessional, a town hall, a soapbox, a bathroom wall, a vaudevillian stage, a stand-up comedy routine, a university, a protest, a support group, and a spiritual advisor. Their columns were a social media of anonymous posters long before the internet existed, and Ann Landers and Dear Abby were the great moderators of the American experience, for better or worse. But mostly, after spending weeks with these unboring old biddies, I believe that we are better off for having this pair of flamboyant, sardonic, thoughtful, identical spitfires as hidden architects of American culture. Two Midwestern housewives who are willing and ready to actually listen to their readers, to be challenged and then challenge their own views, to admit when they were wrong and do so publicly and without hesitation, and to speak up even when it meant that they would receive a sea of angry letters in response. Their personalities were off-kilter and deeply lovable, their confidence otherworldly, and even when America disagreed with them, it couldn't help but return to sit at their high-heeled feet. I know that, despite the competition that burned between them, they saw in their identical twin qualities that they wanted to emulate. Two mirrors looking at each other, reflecting back an infinity of themselves, with their millions of readers holding mirrors too. An American funhouse we are still walking through, trying to find the way out of this dizzying infinity, lost and looking for advice on how we get home to our warm beds, how we make sure that the things we love most dearly will be waiting for us there.
Dear Abby, my feet are too long, my hair's falling out and my rights are all wrong. My friends, they all tell me that I have no friends at all. Won't you write me a letter? Won't you give me a call? Sign, bewildered. Bewildered, you have no complaint. You are what you are and you ain't what you ain't. So listen up, Buster, and listen up good. Stop wishing for bad luck and knocking on
This was American Hysteria. You're listening to a cover of John Prine's Dear Abby by our house band, Magpie Cinema Club. Check out their music at the link in our bio. We have a bunch of new merch available at AmericanHysteria.com, and this month, all the profits are going to the Samir Project, a mutual aid group that is directly helping families on the ground in Gaza. If you want to support our show, consider becoming a subscriber, either through Patreon or Apple Plus. You'll get ad-free episodes as well as bonus content, including Hysteria Home Companion, the other podcast that I do with our producer Miranda, where we tell you stories related to the topics that we cover or stories that we just know that you'll love. So go to patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. You can also leave us a message on the Urban Legends hotline at AmericanHysteria.com about a tale that you remember from growing up or even one you've heard recently, and we might do an entire investigation about it. Follow us on Instagram at American Hysteria Podcast, and if you're feeling generous, leave us a 5-star review on whatever app you use. American Hysteria is written, produced, and hosted by me, Chelsey Weber-Smith. Our producer and editor is Miranda Zickler. Our sound designer and associate producer is Riley Swedelius Smith, and our voice actor is Will Rogers. Thanks, as always, for listening. My advice to you is this: I have no fucking idea. Have a great week.